outcomes that are valuable to investors. And we don't talk about donors, we talk about investors. We're asking people to invest in a mission and in the values of the organization. And so tying that back to board recruitment, strong board recruitment leads to building or strengthening existing credibility and fundraising skills that impact your ability to move forward with an ask. And so, Pam, walk us through how we see a recruitment process evolving.
Absolutely. And Andy, I'm so glad that you mentioned credibility. And it's going to be important to keep that in mind when you're recruiting a board member because it's an opportunity to build, to elevate the credibility of your organization. And so many people don't consider that when they're looking for a board member. Oftentimes, boards are just short of people. It's hard to get someone to be able to commit and to be engaged. And so we have a tendency to lean towards kind of the warm body mode, but we want to encourage something very different in this process. So we're going to start with identifying the right board member. It's hard to do that if you don't know what your needs are, right? So you've got to do that kind of assessment piece first. Where are there some industry gaps in your organization? What kind of skills do you need? What kind of affiliations are you looking for? What expertise? What level of experience? Once you know what it is you're looking for, then you'll be in a better position to help to identify that individual. You look into what are my resources for identifying a good board member. Well, of course, you've got your existing board, and you probably only want to tap into the ones that are engaged, right? But you've got your donor base, you've got your volunteers. Hopefully, you've got good community relations, corporate partnerships that you can tap into to identify a really good candidate for your board. Then you're going to move into the evaluation piece. And the great thing about the evaluation piece is that opportunity for you to make sure that this individual's values are aligned with your values, with your organization's values, your mission, your culture. And once you are able to do that, then you're going to want to make sure that you do some preliminary research. You're going to just, of course, you can use AI, you could use Google, whatever it is you choose, but you want to start asking some questions as well. What reputation does this individual have? How philanthropic do you know them to be? And sometimes you can find that information out on your own, or sometimes you just got to ask some questions. Then you want to be able to do a little bit of an assessment. And we all know about the time, talent, and treasure, but there's so many more questions to ask because someone being available doesn't necessarily mean that they're willing. And if they're willing, then the question is, do they really have the passion? We're going to move into the actual recruitment process. When you're looking at recruitment, of course, you need to meet the individual. Every organization does that a little differently. Some organizations have nominating committees. Some use their executive committee. There are some boards that require that if you're going to move off of the board, if you're going to roll off, that you've got a requirement to submit one or two new candidates to the board for review. So again, depends on your organization, what's going to work best for you. But you're going to look at being able to talk with someone about the board roles and responsibilities, the expectations of your organization. Some organizations use the board recruitment process as an opportunity to look at their bylaws and making sure that if there's any changes that need to take place there, that they can do that then as well. You want to perhaps share a job description with this candidate. They need to know what all the requirements are. Maybe that's the opportunity for you to also share with them a commitment letter. This is what it would look like if you decide to join our organization. When you look to invite a board to an event or a candidate to an event or a program so they can see your mission in action, you want to make sure that if you're an organization that works with children or certain demographics, that there's going to be a comfort level there. I know that sometimes I've seen where people invite folks in and they haven't been vetted properly. Maybe they haven't done a background check on this individual and they find themselves in some challenging situations. So make sure you think those things through as well. Um, when it's time to make the ask, you want to make sure that it's more of a mission ask. And for some people, a mission ask looks different. But for me, a mission ask has everything to do with making sure that when I make the ask, the person can actually see themselves in the mission of my organization. They can see the role that they would play. They can also see that they can add value to the organization. People always wonder why board members over time start to kind of, I don't know, fall asleep at the wheel or become less engaged. Oftentimes that has to do with there's a misalignment. They don't feel like they're adding value. And people who volunteer their time, they want to add value. So we move into the commitment part. And now we're going to look at that written agreement, that commitment. We want to make sure that we have an onboarding process, an orientation process. Now, you may say to yourself, but you know what? Didn't we go through all that in the recruitment phase? We talked to them about that already. It is important to reiterate those things. There's nothing wrong with going over those again. Sometimes folks need to hear things two or three times, or maybe they hear it differently the third time. You want to make sure too that you potentially prepare them with another member of the board, someone who's engaged, hopefully, so that there's a little bit of mentorship going on there. You want to celebrate the fact that they've said yes and that they're committed to the organization, and you want to do that publicly. There's a little bit of accountability with that. I find that when you acknowledge their commitment publicly, there's a little bit of, oh my, now everybody knows that I'm on this board, and I don't want to look like just, a bump on a log. You also want to make sure that your engagement, the same level of engagement that you have from the beginning, you want to carry that throughout their experience on their board, right? Because that level of engagement isn't just for the initial time, it's throughout those relationships that the board members have with the ED and the CEO, they matter. I've been in situations where, sometimes eds wear multiple hats and they're not able to keep those relationships warm and solid, and then again the board member feels a little disconnected and then they become disengaged. So that's your commitment there. And Andy, you want to go to the next slide?
I will. I was welcoming RJ in the chat. Welcome aboard, RJ. Well, one of the things that is very important is to us when we're out and about working with nonprofits around the country is that we see how quality truly impacts success. I mean, there's a direct correlation of the quality of the board and the success of a campaign, a major giving strategy, a strategic planning process, all kinds of activities that we work with folks. And the effectiveness of that nonprofit is so closely tied to the strength of its board. And nothing is more important to the health of your nonprofit than having a highly qualified and engaged group of board members. And again, these great boards, they drive great outcomes, while weak, misaligned boards, they can really hold an organization back. So in short, recruitment is the most fundamental factor in determining a board's success. And some of those common mistakes that I've seen, I'm guilty of having done myself, having worked with nonprofits and for nonprofits over 20 plus years. One of those is rushing to fill the seat. Sometimes we have this vacancy and we treat it as like a last minute scramble. It's the 2 minute warning for the end of the game. And those last minute scrambles are big mistakes. And so that tendency to panic and just grab any willing body, do they have a pulse? Will they say yes to fill that vacancy? And when you have that kind of urgency, sometimes you end up bringing on ill-suited members. So a better approach is to be intentional and start recruiting well before a seat is empty. So having succession plans in place with your through your bylaws, through your governance or your nominating committee, having those conversations early and often will assure that you're not in a last minute scramble to fill a seat. Another mistake is sometimes we overvalue the passion or the skills, and you need both. And it's a mistake to conflate passion with qualification. Yes, passion for the mission is very important. But if you only focus on mission enthusiasm while neglecting critical skills, that can be a recipe for disaster. And it can leave major capacity gaps on your board. And so conversely, you know, recruiting somebody solely for their resume, whether it be their wealth, their title, they're the big dog in town, but who lacks passion can really result in disengagement. And I have seen this in my own experience where we recruited somebody who we thought was the great name, the right name to have, but then at the end of the day, they really didn't have the passion. And so finding that balance is key. And I mentioned that because you'll sometimes find yourself in this VIP syndrome where there's star power without that engagement. And it's a very common pitfall. And sometimes you'll get in a rush to waive your normal vetting process because everybody knows them. And then you fail to hold them to the same accountability standards and participation standards, which can result into a board member who starts missing meetings. They don't show up, they're not prepared, they're disengaged, and that star power does not compensate for the lack of engagement. And then lastly is assuming that somebody that's well connected brings you more contributions. It's tempting to think that that well-connected person will automatically open up a Rolodex. And yes, I'm showing my age by talking about a Rolodex. That Rolodex will automatically open doors and automatically allow you to fundraise with those individuals that they are connected to. That's not always the case. And so bringing on a board member who isn't prepared to utilize their connections or to contribute in other ways can really lead to some disappointment. And so always, always verify a willingness to actively help and not just look at their ability on paper. Now, Brian, who did the introduction at the beginning, he and I, and I'm sure Pam has done the same thing. We have worked with a lot of federal and state judges over the years, and that's somebody that's got really significant limitations on what they can do. And so when you're bringing on somebody like that onto your board, you're not necessarily bringing them on for a fundraising and for them to help open doors, but you're bringing them in some other capacities. And so you want to be mindful of the kind of profession that a prospective board member has and how that contributes to you and their connections. And so Pam went through the four parts of the recruitment process. I want to dive in a little deeper in the identification. Sometimes you're sitting around the table, nominating committee, your senior staff, and you're kind of scratching your heads. Oh my gosh, we don't need to bring somebody on again for the fifth term, or oh, we got to bring Jimmy back on. They served their 2 terms, they've now sat out a year. Now we can bring them back, and because we don't have anybody else. Well, trying to not limit that search just to your current board members, your former board members, really takes a strength of will to figure out how to leverage external networks and resources. One of those areas that I find great source of referrals, well, it's actually two. It's my local United Way and my local Chamber of Commerce. Both of them have programs that they're engaging up and coming leaders or leaders who may not be just the CEO, but the next tier down that a lot of people forget about. And often they themselves as organizations are trying to find meaningful ways to get people who served in a Chamber of Commerce leadership program, how to get that person engaged in the community and to make connections. And so I have found executive directors of United Ways and Chambers of Commerce a great resource to have. Hey, who's up and coming in the community that may not have that visibility yet just because of their role, but they're really doing some great stuff and they're very passionate about our community. You also have some of your best future board members are already involved in the organization you work with. And so consider looking at your dedicated volunteers and investors because they've already shown an interest and commitment, and maybe they're ready to jump into a larger role. But again, you've got to have that really good vetting process but you have a group of people right there supporting you in other ways. And so maybe there's an opportunity to take them to the next level. And so when you're looking at the traits of a strong board member, that active participation in your already pool of prospects is a great sign. Then you're looking for skills, you're looking for passion, and then you're looking for integrity. And a great board member genuinely cares about the cause that you serve. They should be deeply committed to your mission and your values because that intrinsic motivation is very critical. You want people who aren't joining for just the prestige, but because they believe in the work that you're doing. And having served in a nonprofit on the periphery of the metropolitan area of Atlanta, I can tell you that I've had difficulty recruiting somebody who said, "Oh, I'm not going to be on your board, but I'm going to be on the board that's over and plays in the sandbox with the people from metropolitan Atlanta." And so I step back and go, well, then that's not a person I really desire because they're not doing this for the right reason. But every board member should bring something very useful to the table. So you're looking for specific expertise that fills a gap on your board. I mean, nonprofits are still a business in many respects. So we've got to have competent oversight. And your best board members, they don't just lead and lend their name, they roll up their sleeves. So you're always seeking people who have that time, the energy, and the willingness to be active participants. And they should be ready to attend your meetings. They should be ready to serve on your committee. They should be ready to follow through with assignments. Because someone who's not willing to commit their time or is too busy is likely going to become a disengaged board member. And so an effective board member is prepared to work, not just show up occasionally. And so when you think about balancing that expertise with mission passion, that's kind of the really one of the biggest challenges in finding this board members is having both qualified individual and a passionate individual for the cause. You don't want to choose one. You need both. It's not an either or. And so it's a blend of heart and skill because passion for the mission is undoubtedly important. And you want board members who care deeply. However, passion isn't sufficient for somebody to fulfill the governance and oversight duties of a board. If you meet somebody who's really talented, but who isn't excited about your mission, they may not be fully engaged. So keep looking. It's often said that the best board members have their head and their heart in the game. And when you find that right person with the right skill set and the real dedication to your mission, that's the sweet spot. And that's the recruit you really want to prioritize. And so, Pam, let's talk about some best practices here.
Well, you just gave a great segue, Andy, but I do want to add one other thing. Quite often there are businesses, corporations that require their employees to serve on boards. And far too many times I've seen individuals sit on boards because they've been required to sit there. And I just want to encourage anyone who's listening who's found themselves with those individuals at the table that are just really not wanting to be there. There is an opportunity to have a conversation about perhaps selecting someone else at the business that would be a better fit. Far too often, organizations just settle because they need those warm bodies, and we're trying to encourage something different here. So, best practices. I sit on a number of boards in my community, and one of them in particular has a scorecard for the scholarship program. When they get applications in from hundreds, if not thousands, of young people, we've got this scorecard, we've got this rubric. And the same with another board that I sit on, they've got a rubric for their granting process. And so I think that a scorecard or a rubric for board recruitment is a definite best practice. And some of the components that you can consider on your scorecard with a kind of a 1 to 5 scale. You want to make sure that there's that passion that Andy talked about, that there's that commitment. I think of an organization in Atlanta. They focus on young people with type 1 diabetes. And so some of their best board members are parents of young people with type 1. Some of their best board members are people who have lost a loved one because of that illness. And so that's that passion, that's that connection. Those are those opportunities to just kind of, ask certain questions so that you can look at that scorecard and say, you know what, this is a person who is connected in a very meaningful way. Does this individual have fundraising expertise? Do they have the ability to fundraise? Do they even understand what development is and the role that they would play in the organization? Um, Professional expertise. Remember early on, we talked about what your needs are. You're looking at your industry gaps, you're looking at the skills, the affiliations, and other things that you may need. You want to ask that and use that as a component for your scorecard. Are they connected? Do they have the ability to advocate for your organization? What have you seen them doing in the community? Do they sit on other boards and you see them advocating for that organization? What about their time? Do they have the ability? Do they have a willingness to serve? That would be another component on your scorecard. And lastly, do they have diversity of thought? Diversity in demographics, lived experience. Those things matter as well when you're looking for that right engaged board member. The next best practice is informational interviews. Who says that only one person has to have a conversation with this candidate, right? It could be someone from the executive committee, yes, the nominating committee, yes, but there are other board members, especially your engaged board members, where there's a wonderful opportunity to have a conversation. And the great thing about that is I have found that when multiple people have these informal conversations or interviews, if you will, that new information comes out in each conversation. Everyone has a different style, a different ability when they, converse with other people, and you'd be surprised what information you can get. So these are some casual conversations, and you may ask questions like, so, what is it about this organization's mission that resonates with you? You may want to ask, how have you engaged with other organizations in the past? Or how about what value do you hope to bring as a board member? Now, I talk about these informational interviews as if you're the only one interviewing the candidate. I don't know about you, but when I've been asked to be on boards, I ask a lot of questions. I want to make sure that I've seen their financials. I like to see their bylaws. I have a host of questions about their mission, activities, expectations. So I also feel like an exceptional board member is going to ask the right questions of you as well. And then there's the financial commitment piece. I am always amazed when I work with an organization that does not have a financial expectation of their board members. That just, I don't know. And so hopefully it's none of you on this call, but if you don't, it's important because there's an expectation that you're going to raise funds. It's very hard to raise funds outside of the organization if your board members aren't contributing themselves. When it comes to capital campaigns, when it comes to comprehensive campaigns, I can assure you that investors, foundations, they're going to ask whether or not your board is contributing at 100%. Now, the philanthropic landscape has changed quite a bit, where it was just about, is the board contributing at 100%? And you want to make sure they're doing that, not just because you've got a capital campaign, but because they contribute on a regular basis for a host of things that you've got going on in your organization. But with the change in the landscape and what we see today, I've actually had a foundation ask me something very different. They wanted to know what percentage of the goal is being contributed by the board. They haven't done that in the past. And so things are changing. So, in order for you to be prepared, if you don't have financial commitments, if your board is, if you've got board members who are not giving, then there's an opportunity for a conversation. And the last best practice that's not here on this sheet is it's okay to have a conversation with a board member who clearly is not engaged. And it may be time for them to look at opportunities outside of your organization. Andy?
Yeah, and that's a tremendous point that you make. I love those conversations, frank, upfront, and I usually start it with, "Are you enjoying your time on the board?"
Hmm.
And that really opens up a great conversation. And it's not a start of, "Hey, you've missed all these meetings. You haven't contributed." It's, "Are you enjoying this?" And it's okay if you aren't. Then let's let's end this now because I want you to have your heart in this and thoroughly enjoy it. And, it really starts at the beginning of this whole recruitment process. And this is like courting your partner or your spouse. It really is. And so when you think about the approaches that you take, first off, I would review your bylaws and make sure you're following them to the T in how you do the recruitment process. And there's lots of reasons for that. We can have a whole seminar just in that. But the in-person personal recruitment that's personalized, it's face to face, and I get in some places geography will play a factor in it. And so you're doing some of those virtually, but that personal ask is so important because you want the candidate to feel needed and appreciated. And by making them feel special and wanted because of who they are and what they offer is one of the most effective ways to win a yes. And so who makes that ask? Again, go back to your bylaws, double check and see what you got. But it's best to designate one or two people to actually make the invitation. As Pam shared, a couple people could be visiting with them. Maybe invite them to one of your events and see what's going on if they're not already a part of your organization. But having that team approach is great, but then you've got to say, okay, who's making the formal ask? And commonly it's a board chair or the chair of a nominating or governance committee will be the one that formally makes the ask. And often the executive director or the CEO accompanies them, participates in the conversation because that board is who that executive director reports to, the CEO directly reports to. So their involvement is vital. But at the end of the day, having the board member make the ask as a peer to peer is so crucial. And so some of the things, Pam kind of went into the things that you want to share is clear expectations, overview, successes, challenge. During that recruitment process, be very clear. We have an expectation of giving. We have an expectation of participating in these meetings that meet, say, quarterly, monthly, biannually, the third Thursday, whatever it is. There's an expectation that we're going to consider you to be a part of a committee. And hopefully, you've already had a conversation about where you're thinking about which committee to be on, term length. And so, bringing with you, not waiting for them to ask, but have it kind of in the folder when they do ask, "Hey, do you have an annual report, strategic plans, you know, your audit, impact summaries?" All those things really help paint the picture for the candidate. And you want to share some success stories. You want to share some milestones that really help spark some excitement and pride in the ask. And at the same time, you got to be honest about current challenges and upcoming initiatives. Because if you're entering a big capital campaign or a comprehensive campaign, maybe you're facing a transition with your executive director or CEO, you need to let them know because they appreciate candor and it signals a trust and openness that allows them to gauge what work really lies ahead. And yes, there are things that happen. Somebody passes away, lawsuits happen, you know, after you've had this recruitment, those things you can't avoid, but you want to be ahead of the game with things that are on the docket. And right from the recruitment process, provide some form of written documentation about the board expectations. And this can be a one pager, a two pager, depending on how your organization works. This can be a board member agreement, a position description that clearly lists those duties, attendance requirements, service on committees, expectation for preparation for meetings, annual giving, term limits. Hey, we expect you to give annually, and we're going to ask you to make a second gift for something else. Be upfront and sharing all that. And that extra layer of clarity often recaps all your policies and committee involvement. So getting them to that through that process, and then a lot of folks will actually have a formal board commitment agreement or form. And I love these because it really reinforces what you've shared and it signals a very serious commitment to being on the board. Because once on the board, it doesn't stop there. Now you've got orientation, which is going to be crucial for setting a stage for success. But that's another topic for another time. And so, Pam and I, we wanted to make sure we left y'all some time for some Q and A's. And so I'm going to open up the forum, unless Pam, you've got something else you want to add.
No, I'm excited to share one of my own takeaways from our time together, but I'll wait and let folks ask some questions. I know that Brian, that you were managing the Q&A box. Do we have any questions?
We've got some great questions. So, first one, noting the comment about board percentage of giving. It's savvy to ask what percent the board is committing to a campaign. Is there a percentage that's emerging as a standard?
That is a great question. Andy, I suspect that you and I may have different experiences with that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I would say it so foundationally, it depends. In having worked with some foundations, they would like to see that the board has in a capital campaign given anywhere between 10 and 20% of whatever the campaign goal is. Again, it depends on the foundation. But in most cases, I would say the answer is no, as long as there's 100%. But let's not forget that the board sets the trajectory for the campaign, right? I've had campaign chairs give an amount of, I'd like to see us as a collective governing body have $1 million collectively. Some is 500. That it depends on what the goal is. Not everybody, of course, on the board has the same capacity level. So then there are some campaign chairs that would just say, I need this to be a stretch gift. I need you to be uncomfortable in this because this is our goal and this is what we want to do. This is what I'm doing. So the campaign chair sets the example. And it just really lays the foundation for just a strong trajectory.
Well, and I'll share, I've actually had a board chair sitting next to me or sitting between me and a college president when we were making a presentation with a major foundation in Atlanta. And the executive director of that foundation actually said to the board chair, your board's not doing enough. That
Yeah.
was an eye-opening experience.
Yeah, I
And
bet.
I've also had a board chair with me at a foundation where we were making a proposal, and they said, what is the board doing? And the board chair, who I really appreciated, we said, right now, this is where we are for annual giving. This is the percent who are into the campaign. And I will tell you, it's not 100% on the campaign. And those that are not 100% are still paying off their pledges from our last initiative.
Hmm.
And so, being very detailed about why you might not have 100% for a particular project or campaign is really important because it conveys we have people that are invested across the board
Hmm.
and saying, we've got 100% annual giving, we've got 100% giving to something secondary is really important. Um, and it just depends on the foundation. I've not had any businesses really ask that
Mhm.
or individuals ask that. It's mostly foundations that will ask about percent of board giving and where it's at, but no hard and fast rules really.
Somewhat of a follow-up question, potentially, considering a nonprofit that has a bylaw stipulation for service recipients to be present on the board, a seat or two reserved for people who are beneficiaries of services. How does that dynamic need to be played into this overarching recruiting, developing, and having financial commitment from a full board?
That is great. There are a
I
number
love
of nonprofits um, that find themselves in that same position, and I can tell you that they are very creative in how they manage that. So if there is a graduate of the program, if you will, let's just use um, an organization that supports, single mothers transitioning out of homelessness, and they have a graduate that sits on the board. This is an individual who was homeless at some point, who has graduated and doing much better for herself. Is certainly not going to have the same capacity, but what they do have in their bylaws is, there's a certain percentage based on whatever it is whatever their goal was in the program, because every candidate or every participant has a goal. Like they want to be able to save X amount of dollars by the time they graduate. They want to be debt free by the time they graduate, and then the organization's leadership is able to determine what is going to be most appropriate for that person financially. A program graduate is going to be, I would like to think, incredibly engaged in the organization, because that's the organization that helped them elevate their economy, their agency, and all the other things. So, I see them as great board members, at least the ones that I've had an opportunity to interact with. But the financial side, they're very creative with that.
I'll go to this next one. Not to short your opportunity to respond, Andy, but I think this is
it.
another great question.
This is
Um,
what I'm looking forward to.
what can an organization do if they already have an established board and would like to revamp it to engage those who are not engaged? And this comes with the context of the organization representing the question has a 50-member board and several board members who have been serving for more than 10 years on the board. It's a great question.
Oh
Great.
my gosh, and I've experienced it. I've been a part of organizations that have made this process. It's good, it's bad, it can be ugly. I mean, it can be all those things. And I go back to the bylaws. And so if you're not regularly reviewing your bylaws at least every 2 years and updating them, because times change, policies change, and whether you are a faith-based organization that has to have, say, the pastor of the church or this many members of that house of worship on your board. I mean, you got all those kinds of nuances, especially in these bigger boards. And so how you navigate that is really tricky, but it really starts with, say, your executive committee of the board, and sometimes it's putting together a task force. I love task force. It's a period of time. Hey, we're going to review the bylaws. We're going to make recommendations to the board. And in that, one of those could be, hey, we want to bring the board down to a more manageable size. And here's the process that we see getting us there. That was one organization I saw did it. Another organization, the executive committee just said, you know what? Here's the decision we want to make. They put it forward to a full board vote without really much thought in how they were going to do it. And they said, yeah, let's do it. And then we'll figure it out later how we whittle it down. Um, but it's a tricky conversation. Lynn, I would love to hear more about that afterwards, and kind of learn more about your organization so that I could provide you better guidance and how you can make that transition. But I think it might be starting with like a task force reviewing your bylaws and just having a very open, honest, candid conversation as a full board based upon those findings and then their recommendations and then implementing them. Um, and that can be a great, healthy conversation. And I think for those people who aren't really engaged or active, again, it's that conversation. You're visiting with board members. If you're not visiting with a board member 2 or 3 times a year, one on one, at least, that's how you can get away from that disengagement. And you can have those conversations. What is do you find, does this thing bring you joy? That's what I was thinking of.
Hmm.
So I'll stop talking now, but Lynn, I would love to follow up with you afterwards. Uh, I know that we're kind of getting towards the end. I do want to give the plug. We have another one of these. Pam was gracious enough to say, yes, Andy, let's do another one. And so we have four of these total. So our next one is on effective board management, the 16th of October at 1:30 Eastern Standard Time, 12:30 Central Standard Time. Our contact information is on here. We'd love to have a conversation with you if you've got questions. And we're happy to talk about board recruitment. Lynn, you and I scan this. Well, let's follow up and have a conversation. Pam and I, are available to, for a 30-minute consultation, free of charge. It's no pressure. And let's talk about your goals. Let's talk about your recruitment goals. Let's see where you are and how you can turn some of these inspired notes that you might have written down into truly measurable results, because we'd really love to see you achieve your board's goals, because we know they're ultimately going to make you a stronger, healthier organization.
Mhm. Andy, that's great because our ultimate goal, and I know you may be saying to yourselves, we've heard this before, but it is absolutely true. We've been in this business for decades, working with organizations, helping them extend their reach and deepen their footprint. And we enjoy going to those ribbon cuttings. We enjoy seeing you succeed. And we decided on this topic because we see across the country how challenging it is. I shared with someone recently, this executive is just feeling exhausted by the challenges on the board, and she said, how did we get here? And then my question to her was, well, how did it start? And it's everything that we've been talking about today. And of course, there's so much more. And so, if you want an opportunity just to talk a little bit, no pressure at all, because you've got some questions that you weren't able to ask, or maybe you're seeing this recording and you weren't available to ask, and you want to reach out, please do. We have lots of insight and expertise, and have especially around boards. So.
And Pam and I come from a variety of backgrounds, not just in helping other organizations, but we have led organizations. We've served I personally do not serve on a board at the moment, which is the first in a long time, only because I've recently moved. But it's something that we both are very passionate about, because not only are we advising clients on board, but we have been board members. We have been leaders working with and managing a board. So, we didn't stay at the Holiday Inn last night.
Oh man, I look forward to getting to a place, Andy, where we're helping them, really make some of those tough decisions,
Yeah.
because sometimes you have to.
Yeah.
Great. Andy, Pam, thank you so much for sharing your perspective and experience today. Everyone, thank you for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you again in a month for the second in this series on building and engaging an exceptional board. Thanks, everyone.